can just go around the table, so to speak, and just get everybody to give their 5 minutes worth on what they are most watching in the US elections, and what they find interesting, worrisome, hopeful, etc. Hopeful, I think, is probably not going to play much of a role, but I don't know, maybe Jenny, you want to start.
Oh goodness, I haven't got anything prepared. Just reacting to some of the things that have been said already. I think that the question of Huawei was obviously extremely divisive in the Tory party. And I think that although it was interpreted that Boris Johnson gave way, he did give way, but not actually 100%. For example, Huawei is still setting up a new centre just outside of Cambridge. So I think that when we're looking at whether governments are shifting on this question of Huawei, which is after all the litmus test, that we need to look very, very carefully at what is actually agreed. For example, Jeffrey Sachs said last Saturday that Italy had, agreed to a ban on Huawei. I haven't actually seen that reported in the press. It wasn't reported in the Financial Times. And I'd very much like to see the wording. So I think that as far as Britain is concerned, there's a lot of talk about how Biden is an Irishman, and he's not going to be, very keen on Brexit, and he's going to be cool towards Johnson because the Tories have said they don't give a toss about international law, and they're going to do whatever they want. And of course, the danger is that this will jeopardise the agreement on Northern Ireland. And of course, my head is in a buzz at the moment because we've just seen the suspension of Jeremy Corbyn from the Labour Party. And that right now, my local group of left activists is having a meeting, but I decided to come on this because it just gets all too much. And they're considering putting forward various motions as to whether they should accept the Equalities and Human Rights Commission or question it, or whether just to protest the suspension. But obviously there's a large chunk of us that wish that both sides, both Keir Starmer and Jeremy Corbyn, had modified their language and steered us away. This was obviously an accident that was waiting to happen. And if people on the left start leaving the Labour Party, then that means that the people on the left that stay in the Labour Party will get an even more of a kicking. And believe it or not, I get a huge kicking in my local Labour Party because they think I'm a Maoist, anarchist, Trotskyist, Stalinist, anarchist, Leninist, anythingist. So what I'm looking out for in the election, I suppose, is sort of quite a narrow focus because I'm very concerned about the military, is I've seen that people like Medea Benjamin and some of the peace activists in the United States, anti-war activists, are arguing that Biden can be pushed to the left. And obviously Jeffrey Sachs was arguing that very, very strongly last Saturday. But as we saw with Obama was actually pushed to the right. And Obama, I was just rereading something the other day, which was suggesting that the whole question of the South China Sea, that Obama had wanted after he'd had that famous meeting with Xi Jinping on the lawn of whatever it was, and that they'd come to some kind of agreement that tensions wouldn't be ratcheted up. But that he came under enormous pressure, and they went ahead with the freedom of navigation operations, and that actually Obama was reluctant to take that path. But anyway, they went ahead and they blamed China for reneging on the agreement. So that's what I'm looking at, is this prospect of, can Biden be pushed to the left or to the right? I think he'll be pushed to the right. I'm a pessimist in that respect. And I didn't say about the prevailing feeling in the Labour Party. Last night I watched an interview with Lisa Nandy, in which she was talking about, she's the Foreign Secretary of the Labour Party, in which she was talking about the policy towards China, and she even criticised the Tory government for having some kind of deals behind the scenes with China over economic, some kind of economic deals to help us out of the pandemic. And she criticised that, totally buying into NATO, totally buying into Britain's place as with Europe, with the United States, totally naive to any contradictions, and totally naive about what kind of influence Britain has anymore. It sounds like 10, 15 years out of date. Anyway, that's enough from me, sorry.
No, I think that's excellent. I do have a few questions, but why don't we go around once first, and then we can have a discussion. Maybe just going around the table as I see it. Why don't you go, Oscar, next?
Here in Mexico, my perception is that the government, which is the left-leaning government, so to speak, is perfectly aligned with Trump. Perfectly aligned with Trump. They went to Washington. The president went to Washington in July. I found that totally unnecessary, to announce the free trade agreement, the new free trade agreement. The government is perfectly aligned with the free trade agreement, and is perfectly aligned with having put Mexican troops on the Guatemalan border to prevent migration from Central America into Mexico, so that it doesn't walk into the American border, which is what Trump and his people wanted. That's the other side. Is China here has absolutely no weight. China and Mexico does not exist. It doesn't. I mean, it's surprising, but even though Mexico imports from China huge quantities of money, it doesn't trade with China. It doesn't export anything to China. There is no significant Chinese presence. There are no important Chinese firms here. Mexico feels like a state of the United States. That's what it feels like. How this came to be, I don't understand. I have only lived here for 15 years. But the alignment with Washington, it has always been aligned, no? Since the end of the 19th century. But the way it is aligned worries me. It has no distance, no distance. So whomever is president, Mexico will follow. It will not contradict, it will not face, it will not anything. It will just follow it. The level of subordination of the capitalist class here, I think was detrimental to its economic development. And it blew up. Whatever Mexico had developed was destroyed during the 1990s. And that capitalist class disappeared or transformed into a financial class. But the former owner of one of the banks moved back to Spain. And I say moved back because his parents were from Spain. So it's very odd. I mean, there isn't, there doesn't appear to be a national capitalist class as such. And there doesn't appear to be a national interest. It's just, I mean, the drugs, for example. Drugs and migration are the two big subjects. In migration, what's happened with migration is that the Mexican government has not done much to prevent the deportation of Mexicans from the United States. But that began with Obama. And in Mexico, it is said that it fares worse with the Democratic Party than with the Republican Party. That's the common knowledge. And they haven't done anything about migration. And the other thing is, they haven't done anything about drugs either. So you have the Drug Enforcement Administration operating inside Mexico as if it was inside the United States. And now they have just detained the general who was a former Secretary of Defense for being in the drug ring. I'm not sure if that man was particularly in the drug ring, but what is clear is that the US perception is that in Mexico, the legal system doesn't operate. And the political class is willing to go along with that. Instead of having the judicial work, they go along with, no, it doesn't work, and let's have the United States do whatever it does. It has formally protested for the intervention against this general, but there's a problem. There's a problem of corruption here that I have not seen in any other country ever. It appears that drugs stem up the political class all the way up to the president. And that is a determinant of the way Mexico relates to the US and how they face the US.
That's very interesting. Yeah. Just a quick remark. It almost sounds as though the Mexico is becoming like a kind of inner city black neighborhood, which has no autonomy, etc., and is policed in certain draconian ways. And it is allowed, or at least the local gangs kind of cooperate with the police to do it. It's amazing. Maybe Bruno can go next.
Thank you. Yes, first of all, the basic question I'm asking, but I have no answer, will be what will happen in the United States taking into account the losers of the elections? Because I think that the level of violence within American society on both sides now is very strong. And I'm quite afraid what can happen with the loser. Whatever the loser will be, Biden or Trump, the situation will be maybe very tense in the United States. And in French media and in French mainstream media, we have articles telling about the possible civil war in the United States after the election. And it's very important because it's a very pro-American media that are aware the situation is very bad for them. And that's very important. I think the basic, France is an imperialist country, but it's not an imperialist country that it used to be. Now it's an imperialist country linked within the system, the imperialist system. The best proof of that is that France came back to the military organization of NATO during Sarkozy's presidency. And it's very clear that now France is linked with what we call the deep state. But in the same time, the Western Bloc is full of contradiction. And I see from the French point of view that the French leading class is very unsure of what will happen with the big boss in the United States. Of course, Macron and all the presidency don't like Trump. They would like Biden to be elected, but anyway, they are very fear that maybe the big world policeman is not very efficient now. And I think that that's the main question now will be what will happen with the consistency of imperialism after the election. The election is important because it reveals that the imperialist bloc is full of contradiction, internal contradiction. And of course, there are contradictions with emerging countries on the other side, but there is no unity to fight with inside the bloc. And that's interesting because it opens a lot of possibilities we have to think about. But the basic question is, will the United States be united in 2 weeks after what can happen? Whatever the winner, the official winner will be, it can be. And it's interesting because we had all this colored revolution about a falsified election, so-called falsified election in Ukraine, in Belarus, in a lot of countries that were not loved by Western powers. But now it looks that we can have the same scenario in the United States, that the election can be considered as falsified by the loser. And it will be very interesting to see, to observe that, just taking into account we have to deal with a superpower and a nuclear power, and it's of course much different than in a situation in, let's say, Venezuela, Bolivia, or Belarus. And that's the point I would like to mention and to discuss about.
Fantastic, great. We'll come back to all those points. Maybe Attila, then Makoto, then I will have the 5 minutes, and then we'll open up for discussion.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So, well, Hungary is a pretty imperialist country. So we are not trying to play any kind of a saying. Nonetheless, the situation is getting very interesting in a lot of ways. One is that the Orban media has started a massive campaign on behalf of Trump, which I've never seen in this country. So we are seeing on a daily basis an indoctrination for Trump. And this is a funny situation because I don't know what this media is going to say after losing, but most probably they would like to even use that as an internal fight. So so my feeling is that they are preparing an even bigger. So the right-wing historical political bloc is preparing a much bigger and more competitive fight than ever. So they are making the momentum for that. That I think is also true in the sense that they are trying to go as ideological as possible, not to be accounted for real achievements. So what we see in Poland, Bruno, concerning abortion, which is crystal clearly a calculated attempt to divert all attention from all other aspects of social life. So they go into these debates, and I see the similar situation in Hungary. It can be abortion, it can be LGBTQ or whatever, but they are going just to pure ideological confrontation with liberals. That's the most important thing for them. So that's what I see. At the same time, I can also see that Orban is making huge mistakes. So this is the first time for a very long period of time when I see that he is miscalculating socially quite a lot of things. One thing, the pandemic. This is a disaster for him. He is unable to maneuver properly in this, but knowing the Hungarian society, even the supporting lower and middle classes as well. I think he miscalculated this kind of liberal approach over the pandemic. The situation is worsening at a dramatic pace, and that's not going to come back. And we can already hear that many of his supporters are actually grumbling now very seriously. This is one. The second, he is a big tactician, but I think at least a tactical mistake was made because he started going against the medical profession. And it's a very funny thing. So this is for us, it's a theoretical problem as well, and I've been thinking about this a lot. To what extent this guy is neoliberal in its social and economic policy. And more I'm convinced, even against my previous ideas, that in some ways he is truly a neoliberal guy. He wants to get rid of as many state employees as possible. So he has been doing this in the academia. Now universities are kicked out of state protection. And now he's telling to the medical professionals, in case I give you more wage, higher wage, but you cut all your links to the private. You choose between the private and the state, which is causing a dramatic tension in the Hungarian medical profession, which is not powerless. So we have to be aware of that, that this is not a powerless group in a lot of ways. And then we are, there has been a continuous talk of that, how much power they have. So that's the other thing where I think he's making a mistake. And in case the international scenario, meaning the Democrats come into power in the US, that's also very bad news for Orban, because Orban is definitely an enemy for the Democrats. This is crystal clear now. And then Bruno is nodding, but I think he is. So the Democrats don't like Orban because he is trying to make deals towards Russia, China, and all these things. This is what they don't tolerate. Trump tolerated far more, right? Regardless of the problems. So in that sense, he's a real enemy. If that comes, then Orban has some problems. So I don't know what's going to come out of this in the longer run, but I think we are seeing interesting things now in this whole region. So Poland is super interesting now. Hungary is getting very interesting. And then the situation in Serbia, Romania, and Slovakia is also super interesting. So once again, this region is going to be something to read about. Yes, that's
great. Thanks so much. Makoto, 5 minutes.
All right, I shall try. Japanese situation is confusing, as I said, and the new Suga cabinet government is short term because it is a succession of former Prime Minister Abe's remaining term, which means within a year. So we will have soon general elections for new administration early in January, earliest possibility in January next. And at least probably until next spring, we will have general elections. As you probably remember, Japanese general elections is very much affected by United States situations. And after Obama cabinet, we saw a rare case to have Democratic Party in Japan got power and inaugurated a similar direction with Obama, green recovery and child allowance policies. to cope with general policy to go from concrete to human being. It's a good slogan, and it worked, in my judgment, to recover Japanese economy from large minus to plus within a year. So almost 10% recovery was achieved in under Democratic Party green recovery policies. But unfortunately, soon it was pushed back after especially Great East Japan earthquake, big tsunami, as you do remember. So it was a tragic
After the
history.
tsunami, yeah.
Yeah, Democratic Party to not to able to get to continue their policies. But in that context, I am personally expecting Biden's victory for sure. But I saw in TV news an interesting story in China. Very important persons are expecting more Trump because Trump may cause failure for the future of United States. Definitely much bigger than Biden's administration. It will be good for China.
Sorry, could you repeat that, please? How will it be
must
good for
be
China?
better for China to come over United States dominance in the world. So
I see.
it's ironical
Right,
for Trump
right.
expecting their failures. In case of Japan, it was not so straightforward, and it is very, very, very confusing what will happen in the after election situation in United States. I am also afraid of violence from the defeated party supporters in many aspects with weapons and so forth. It is dangerous situations, and how to prevent that confusion will be a big problem. And in contrast, Japanese society is relatively stable and less affected by pandemic, although we have relatively high level, but a daily infected person remains just under or around 200 persons only. It is very small in number in comparison with other countries. But why can it be so low in case of Japan remains to me to be explained further. There is no strong explanation for that. So this situation is a problem, and further problem is although the Japanese society is relatively stable for the pandemic, but still economic situation was similarly worsened by the influence of global situation. Their economy in Japan is so severe nowadays, having so many people suffering from shortened labor time and irregular working. Okay.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Makoto. And I guess I'll just say a couple of things and then hand it over. I kind of concur with those of you who pointed out that there is still a possibility of Biden winning. I think it shows how deeply divided American society is. Despite how repulsive a figure he is, you find that at least 40% of the American people are shown by the polls to consistently support him throughout. And at the same time, of course, there is the other problem of Biden, which is, he may be worse in many ways than that. Basically, the way I look at it, since over the last almost 2 decades, America has actually become progressively less governable. And it has been harder for the political establishment to win. George Bush nearly lost the election. I mean, twice, in fact. Obama won, but actually, I wonder if it had not been for the 2008 crisis and a lot of people actually coming over to Obama saying, because just weeks before the crisis, white people in America were being interviewed saying, I cannot vote for him, he's a black man. And then they converted over and they voted for Obama, and that's what accounted for his win and so on. So, and then by the time you get to Trump, you have a complete political outsider, somebody no part of the establishment wanted to win. He won the election. Even the American capitalist class actually only came around to him afterwards, after he started wooing him. And of course, they also started wooing him and essentially came to some sort of terms. So in a certain sense, basically, the American political establishment, and I think the British political establishment, is in a quandary. They want to continue neoliberal policies, but the result of neoliberal policies is to make their countries less governable and make their politicians less electable. Take a look at the parallels. In 2019, Johnson won by breaking down the red wall of working class voters that Labour used to have, effectively squandered by the Labour establishment. In 2016, Trump had won by breaking down the blue wall in similar types of post-industrial Rust Belt parts of the country. So these people, basically, the left, 40 years of neoliberalism should have strengthened the left. This left should have mobilized the discontents of neoliberalism and said, let's do something. But the left has proven unable to do this for very deep reasons, which we can talk about. But that has left the neoliberal heart of the Western ruling class basically without a political strategy to control their own societies. And by the way, I agree with all of you who were, at least I am filled with foreboding. We are sitting just few 100 or 2 miles away from American cities. And after the election, the level of violence, as somebody pointed out on both sides, is so great that we could have a civil war. This is a very serious possibility. And as I think I've mentioned before in this forum, there is also very informed people are wondering whether the army will be brought in to decide the election. Of course, the Supreme Court has already been packed by Trump. So I think there is going to be discord across, because I think that this time around, if the Democrats do not win, they will have to go back to the drawing board and reconstruct their party. It's going to be a big crisis for them if they win. And of course, if they don't win. If they do win, however, Trump is going to contest it and he's going to bring out his goons out in the streets. So that's the situation. I think the same forces also connect with what Bruno was saying. I think, Bruno, I really appreciated your analysis, and I think you're absolutely right. There are fissures. The fissures in the imperialist front are also widening. But let's not forget that the old story that somehow in the post-Second World War period, all inter-imperialist tensions had disappeared was never true. There had always been tensions. France spent 3 decades out of NATO. And, you know, there have, in fact, been tensions. The Germans started doing their Ostpolitik, and eventually the Americans threw in the towel and said, okay, we will make a deal with the Soviet Union as well, etc., etc. So there has always been these tensions. And so I think that but we are definitely looking at a situation where the neoliberal establishment of imperialism also does not know what to do, because countries like Japan and Germany, I see them as being considerably less neoliberal, perhaps France as well. But if they go the non-neoliberal way, their ability to keep capitalist hegemony in place will be more endangered, because more and more they will be going along the lines of having more social policies and having, you know, controlling the economy and regulating the economy more, directing it away from financial speculation towards production. If all these things start to happen, which we would all welcome, then, however, it will empower ordinary people in these countries to actually create an alternative which takes it even further away from neoliberalism and even capitalism. So I think this is what we are looking at. That's partly why I think these elections are very important and why I've been watching. I just add a couple of minor points before I close. Somebody pointed out that the capitalist classes, I think both in Japan and in France, they are sort of a bit in a quandary. The Financial Times is reporting that the capitalist class is also splitting much more in the United States. Many of them are remaining with Trump, but others have gone over to Biden, and it's not clear exactly what they want to do. So that's one thing. And the second thing I wanted to say is I hope you all saw Glenn Greenwald's statement today. He has resigned from The Intercept because the Intercept editorial board wished to edit out of his most recent submission all criticism of Biden. And in fact, he is very incensed about it. And if you just Google Glenn Greenwald Fox News or Glenn Greenwald Real Clear Politics, you will see an amazing video of Glenn Greenwald being interviewed on Fox News and being exceedingly critical of the media establishment. So I think it's really worth watching. So we are in very stormy times. Obviously, I'm going to watch on November the 3rd, but we won't get the aftermath. And anyway, we are going to talk about it again next week. So having said that, I think I'd like to open up to questions, and I'd like to prioritize questions for Jenny because I know she has to leave in 10 minutes. So fire away. Any questions for Jenny?
Well, will you explain a little bit more on the Labour Party situation in UK? I'm confused after what is going after Jeremy Corbyn. Is there a new leader who want to succeed Corbyn type of policies?
Yeah, Jenny?
I'm not sure that I quite understood the question, but obviously,
I think Makoto is asking, can you say something more about the Labour Party situation and particularly whether there is another politician who will succeed Corbyn? On the left.
you mean succeed Corbyn in terms of leading the left? Well, there's a group of MPs that are continuing to support Corbyn, and there's a few names that come to mind, but I don't think that anything has been resolved, given that Corbyn is still the main spokesman for the left.
I see.
And how strong do you think the fight back for Corbyn will be? Because yesterday I read that some MPs had met to discuss whether they would leave the Labour Party in solidarity, but then apparently nothing came of it. So I just like your assessment, your gauging of how strong will be the fight back. And also you said something very interesting. You said you're getting a lot of flack. So what is the left generally, like from your point of view, what should the left do basically at this point?
I don't have the answer to that, Radhika, and I don't know what the left is going to do. As I say, we've got a meeting, actually, we've got a very strong left group in my neighbourhood, and I said that what they're debating, I think that there's a strong feeling amongst people on the left like myself that we do not want to get sidetracked because of what's coming down the line, where the pandemic is out of control. There's going to be more and more unemployment. There's already a housing crisis. There's all the things that you talked about, people's disaffection with politics. There's always a danger of swinging to the right, and the left does not have a long-term strategy to build itself up in the red wall constituencies that it lost, and it doesn't have a short-term strategy other than sticking to the social democratic policies that it has been doing for so long. When I read in the Morning Star that what has happened with the suspension of Jeremy is that basically the Labour Party is being taken over by the capitalist class.
What was the process that led to the suspension of Corbyn? I mean, how did it all come about?
Exactly.
It looks very odd.
Exactly. Exactly. So it just so happens that when you try and get to the bottom of anything, it seems to me at the moment, whether it's in the Labour Party or in British politics or in world politics, it's impossible to get to the bottom of things because I mean, I think that they both spoke out of turn. I think Keir Starmer could have found another way of saying things. I think Jeremy Corbyn could have found another way of saying things, and then we could just put a line under it and focus on the pandemic, focus on the economy. The Tories are privatising everything. It's just terrifying.
Interesting that you're also critical, but that's because I tended not to be critical. Basically, what happened, Oscar, is that for the last, I would say, basically since Jeremy Corbyn became the leader of or even started contesting for the leadership of the Labour Party, there has been a war against him. And one of the biggest sticks that has been used to beat him with is accusations of anti-Semitism. In Britain, there is anti-Semitism. There is, people in all parties are anti-Semitic, but somehow it matters a lot, everybody, because Jeremy was threatening to become the leader of the Labour Party, it became the only issue in the Labour Party. Jeremy tried to address this issue. There were, I think, 3 reports already. He tried to address this issue. He said, okay, we're going to make sure it's all, and he accelerated the process. But after Keir Starmer became the leader of the Labour Party, he made anti-Semitism into his central plank. I am going to deal with anti-Semitism. And so he commissioned a new report, basically. And when this new report came out, he said, this is a day of shame for Labour, and it's horrible. And then he says that, so this is what he said. And then Jeremy held a press conference in which he said that while he acknowledges that anti-Semitism is a problem, that the extent of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party was over-exaggerated. And this is why he was suspended, basically. Jenny, please feel free to add anything, but that's my understanding.
Jesus.
And I feel that Jeremy basically was not wrong to say that, because what is the point? I mean, they are exaggerating. They're basically making the Labour Party out to be like a basket case, because they are all anti-Semitic and you cannot have such a party. And Keir Starmer is kowtowing to the establishment and saying, yes, we'll do everything. Say yes, sir, 3 bags full, so we will do everything you like. And this is wrong. I think somebody has to step up and say, look, first of all, there's anti-Semitism in the Tory party, in the Liberal Democratic Party, etc. Jenny, and then Attila.
I can't take it anymore. I can't take this endless discussion about anti-Semitism. It's got to the point where it's impossible for people to speak, because you're going to get accused of being anti-Semitic. And there are other things I'd like to talk about. And it's just, so I don't go into a rant about it. I just want to pick up on, I'm sorry, I can't remember your name, the person who spoke about Poland.
Attila.
Yes, about using ideology. They just use this ideology when we should be talking about what's happening to jobs, what's happening to the low-paid workers, what's happening to the people that are being exposed to the pandemic, what's happening with privatization. One of the things that is on hold at the moment, it seems, until the US election, is the Tories have promised to carry out an integrated review on defence and security, but they don't seem to be able to do that. We were promised it in this autumn, and we were promised it in October, and partly it's because they're in a dilemma as to what to do about the budget, whether they need to continue to be paying out to support people who are, being laid off. Anyway, there's loads to talk about. I don't want to really take up any time, but I think there's some very interesting questions about the contradictions in the US ruling class, the way that, as you said, some of the business class is staying with Trump, and they don't like Biden because of the corporation tax, but then there are others who support Biden. I've been thinking about contradictions in the US working class, ruling class in relation to China for years, And we really need more analysis of that. And then, of course, there's going to be the contradictions around climate change, because some business is able to adapt now and others don't want it. So I'll stop talking there.
Thank you very much. Attila.
Yes, I just wanted to draw a parallel, asking whether that's the case. So I think this issue of governance, what Radhika you have raised, is actually the case in Britain as well. So basically, I mean, both parties, for various reasons, remind me of Life of Brian, this sect which commits suicide, that they go up and then they commit suicide, and they commit suicide for various reasons. But the thing is that it's, I mean, the country, which I knew a little bit because I studied there and so on, is actually, I mean, I have never seen such a problem of governance in Britain, so which is the point of Radhika. So don't you think that we are both heading in these ways? And then actually two more things. That the Tories seems to be, I mean, that I need an explanation, because this I could not solve during Brexit as well. So what particular business interest they are doing this? Because most of the business was against Brexit. And then, you know, as a Marxist, I find it just very difficult to understand. How is it? So what? I assume that there might be some very particular business interests, which is not representing the business interest overall of the, you know, the capitalist as they are. So I'm just asking this. Because
Really, since you have to go, I'll let you go first, and then I'll come in.
Oh, I want to hear what you've got to say as well. But in my understanding is that it was the hedge funds, and they just want to be cut loose of any kind of constraint, and they seem to think that it was also the best way to break into China by lining up with Trump, because Chinese people have got nice fat savings and they want to get hold of those savings. But of course, when you look at the City of London, now they're interested in the City of London, even the financial class is split, because the City of London is going to lose its powers as banks and so on just sort of move to Europe. In terms of ungovernability, I'm not really sure. The influence of the far right waxes and wanes, and my feeling is that people just really want a government that's capable of getting on top of the pandemic. So in that sense, that governance is falling apart, but whether it's leading to riots on the streets and armed gangs as it is in the United States, I don't think so.
Well, I like to begin with the ungovernability bit and then come back to the capitalist class part. So the ungovernability part, I'm not suggesting that Britain is in the grip of a fascist or pre-fascist crisis or anything like that. What I am saying is that it has become harder to win elections with the policies that the establishment wishes to implement. And that is why you can get a rogue politician like Boris Johnson who goes off and he says, and essentially raise a populist appeal whose only purpose is to suck up votes, because that's the only way of winning. So in a certain sense, you know, in the old days, in political science, more critical political science, we used to talk about the politics of power and the politics of support. The politics of power is what any party government must do in power in order to please the capitalist classes. The politics of support is what it must do to win elections. But these two have been going in opposite directions. That is what I mean by the crisis of governability. And having said that, I think once they grow sufficiently far apart, I think the possibility of riots and sort of street level ungovernability is always there. It's beginning to happen in the US. And I think if the combined crisis of pandemic, Brexit, etc., grow bigger, you will get that in the UK as well. I've been watching the anti-lockdown demonstrations in the UK. These people are very upset. So that's my first point. The second point, I think, so in terms of the capitalist classes, I'd like to say something more general, and then I would like to say something more specific about the UK. What I'd like to say in general is that the neoliberalism has meant for the last 40 years more and more unqualified support for big corporations. That has alienated a very substantial section of small business, as well as certain other factions of the capitalist classes. So big corporations, multinational corporations, and financial corporations, they have all got a lot of support by nearly all governments. And this means that small business has also become alienated. And by the way, we on the left should not necessarily be anti-small business. Throughout the history of the left, capturing sections of small business has always been part of left strategy. So that's okay. And by the way, I should also like to say that I follow French politics less closely, but some of the same things I'm talking about is also visible in France. That's why Macron could only win by creating essentially a new party out of nothing. So anyway, so that's the general point about the capitalist class. Then I want to say something specific to the UK. In the UK, the city has actually changed drastically. In 2016, after the Brexit vote, Alan and I wrote a piece called The City, the Conservatives, and Brexit, the City and the Conservatives, or something like that. If you like, I'll share it with all of you. In this, we pointed out that basically since the 1970s and 80s, when you still had what people call gentlemanly capitalism of the old small city investment firms and so on, that has disappeared. Once, especially after the Thatcher's Big Bang, what began to happen is that big American banks began to create their offices in the city because the city provides the dream deregulated environment for financial houses. So they all began to arrive. This is why you saw the Canary Wharf developments, and also the city also began to expand westward into London, not just to the east. So this is a very different city. And actually, this city does not have a leadership. It's simply based on corporations. They are here today, gone tomorrow. They'll stay in Britain as long as the going is good. If the going is not good, they'll go somewhere else. So in that sense, the city, unlike the decision to join the European Union, the city had no real say in it because there was no organized voice of the city. And then I think what Jenny says about the hedge funds is true. They certainly supported what's his name, as did a few businessmen. Like there is this spectacle of this guy, the fellow who started that vacuum cleaner company, Dyson, who supports, Brexit and British nationalism on the one hand, and then he moves his offices to some foreign location in the next breath. So this is what global Britain is going to be like. And I agree totally with Jenny. It's about removing the last remaining constraints on business. But the fact of the matter is this is going to be bad for even for sections of business, because ultimately small business needs some protection from big business. And that is also why Johnson was able to mobilize small business as part of the discontents against neoliberalism, just as he mobilized sections of the working class. These people actually are not going to be served by his agenda. And by the way, you are looking at the unraveling right now. What is Johnson's biggest problem? His biggest problem is that the votes he got from the Red Wall are now about to melt away because he's having to impose the most draconian lockdowns on precisely those constituencies which are poor, they have crowded conditions, they have all the makings of the super spreader communities, and that's where Johnson is going to suffer. I have to say one thing before I finish. I love the irony of it. Johnson wanted to be world king since he was yay high. So he got his wish in December 2019, and he thought he was going to just have a nice time, rule Britain, be world king, whatever. And now he's got his worst nightmare. No leader would want to lead in this kind of, no serious leader would want to lead in this kind of context. So I think that's poetic justice, although I still wish that Corbyn had won. And if he had won, you would have seen much better pandemic handling than you're seeing now. But anyway, that's my.
Sorry, I've got to go now. It's great.
Bye, Jenny.
See you again.
We will continue for a bit more and finish with all the questions, and then only then.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So, other questions for all the others? Yeah, Attila.
Bruno, Can you are so knowledgeable, but do I understand it properly that the French secret services are actually have given up with Macron and then they just let it go as it is, right? So I mean, these attacks show me that basically the French secret services, which are important players, of course, they are actually going against Macron. I mean, they are fed up with Macron. That's my.
Yes, I do have this impression. Not only Secret Service, but a large part of the, let's say, higher administration is fed up with Macron. They just let him do the business because now it's very hard situation with the lockdown. So they let him do unpopular decision. But basically, they are looking for alternative. The problem is what alternative? Because people are fed up. All people are fed up with all the political class. The right wing, even the fascists, the National Front is observed as something archaic, of something that didn't match the situation for right-wing people. So we are in a situation that there is a vacuum, and even some people are telling that the situation will develop very quickly, and because we see that politicians are planning for the next election, but a lot of people I hear, in the street telling, we don't know that if there will be an election. Before that, we will have revolution. Of course, I don't think that France is ready for revolution, but the fact that people talk about it means that they are very conscious that the situation is very bad. And what I'm concerned about is that in the trade union, we have now a very strong movement to reconstruct a class trade union. So I hope, of course, it will produce something more effective, more efficient than it was earlier. Basically, and now I'm not talking about just France, I think that we are in a very interesting situation, especially in Eastern Europe, because liberals are not able to take profit from the miscontent. But what we call the populists, they are at their end. I think in Hungary it's quite clear, but in Poland now it's very clear. I mean, what happens now, it's something much more important than just, which is an important question. It's not just the question of abortion. The question of abortion was the element that made people taking the street, but they are taking the street for much different reasons. You have peasants taking the street, you have workers taking the street, you have anti-mask taking the streets, but and it means that it's very important for Poland because it's not only the government which is unpopular, it's the church that became unpopular. And for Poland, it's very important because it means that we have a new generation which is looking for something else. And I see that even personally because I wrote a book in France about Solidarność, about solidarity, movement, a historical book. And this book was translated in Polish, and it's of course a deconstruction of all the solidarity movement. First of all, I thought that they will never print it in Poland, and they did. And I talked with my editor in Poland, and he told me something very interesting. He told me, now people are fed up with all this anti-communist ideology, Russophobic ideology we had for the last 30 years, because even the people linked with left solidarity that are, publishing books, these books are not bought. Which books people buy? it is books about Russia, but in a rather realistic way, telling that Russia must be a partner of Poland, and books criticizing anti-communism. And it's important because it means that intellectual book, because who is buying books? Only intellectuals. It means that intellectuals are also fed up with the anti-communist Russophobic ideology they had for the last 30 years. And in the same time, on grassroots level, women are, especially women, are fed up with the church discourse. And it means, you know, that I have the impression that in Poland, in Hungary, in Lithuania, in Slovakia, I think also in Romania even, people are fed up with the populist, inefficient socially trend, but they know that liberals are not the solution because they are fed up also with liberalism. So I don't really know what will happen, but I think that we are observing everywhere in France, in Poland, in Hungary, in United States also, that people just, they are waiting for something else. And even the far right is not an answer. I mean, a lot of people, even when they use some xenophobic or extreme right arguments, they know that these parties are not the answer. I saw that, especially in France during the Yellow Vest movement. A lot of people, which I'm sure they voted for National Front, were completely convinced that National Front is not the solution. So I don't know what will happen, but anyway, I think that we are changing. The world is changing. Not only what this country or that country, all the parameters are changing. And of course, I don't know what will happen, but all the fundamentals of the liberalism and the fundamentals of, well, let's say, traditionalism, religious or ethnical, are seen as inefficient. And that's
absolutely.
That's
And by the way,
point.
Bruno,
That's important for the left. The problem is that in the left we are still very inefficient.
And I would say that nothing exemplifies what you are saying better than these protests in Thailand against the king. And that's amazing. Like, this was never supposed to happen. The Thais are supposed to be like totally revered the king. And it's all apparently young people. It's the young people. And there are people being interviewed, young men and women. I don't know how to tell my parents, but I'm tired of their views. I need them to understand that this is how I feel, etc., etc. So I think that there's a lot to what you're saying, and I also feel that the remark you closed with, that the left really has to learn from this. But at the moment, the left is still tearing itself apart by, you know, vote for Biden, he's the lesser of the two evils. The attack on Glenn Greenwald, forcing him on into the arms of Fox News. I'm not saying he's in the arm of Fox News, but you know, if the only news outlet that's going to interview you is Fox News, and you are essentially a left, one of the most prominent left journalists in the world, what does that say about the state of the left? I think it's pretty pathetic. So, but yeah, Attila. You are muted.
Yeah, just shortly. So two things. One is that I agree with you, Bruno, that the search on behalf of the East European masses has started. You are right in that. We can call it a search phase now. So they are starting listening to alternatives. You are right. The problem and the differences are nonetheless still big. The anti-communist propaganda in Hungary is super efficient still, even at this moment, which is most mind-boggling, because this was the society which benefited in a lot of ways much more than anybody else under that. So it's a very paradoxical thing. How is that possible to have these things? And then I think it goes back even historically longer. So the differences between Poland and Hungary is somewhat related to the idea of state as well. So we have differences. And I think that's something to be taken into account. But to join the optimist, the point, I also see, no, I am absolutely not frustrated as a leftist now, and not just Thailand. Indonesia was very important. And for me, very importantly, Chile.
Yes.
Chile is showing something extraordinarily important, which I am saying that, yes, the pink revolution in Latin America collapsed for internal reasons, but the social momentum is not gone at all, and actually is just increasing in a lot of ways, not to mention, of course, Bolivia and so on and so on. But Chile, for me, as you know, symbolically, the first neoliberal state is actually going against completely the whole idea of this super conservative ideology combined with neoliberal things. For me, it's most heartwarming. So I mean, I am really, for this saved my last week, that's for sure.
I have to say, I have seen a banner in the Chilean protesters last year. Neoliberals started here, it will die here. So, but Oscar, please go ahead.
Yes. I think if we don't look at Mexico as the example of the Latin American left, because it is not, if we look at South America, what we are looking at is the end of not only neoliberalism, but the end of political subordination. Bolivia is an example of how a political party that was overthrown by the United States with a little help from their friends from Santa Cruz, that political party came back with 56% support. So the people are not willing to go along with what the US wants. And it was I'm coming out with a book in the next 3 months. The book it's in print somewhere. Where we explain how the coup was done by the US, how the US reacted to the coup the next morning, who received what money from where, etc. Now, this reaction of 56% of the population is a reaction of autonomy. We are independent. We are not going to subordinate ourselves to the states. Chile is exactly the same. The people in Chile, and we should incorporate my friend. My friend, he lived in exile for like 30 years.
Please send me the email. Yeah.
Yes, I will. He writes regularly on these things. And he says, what's happened is that within the Chilean left, the young people said, this that you guys have done of agreeing to respect the constitution of Pinochet is against what we want. So what you as a leftist party have done is not what we as leftists want, which places a left that is further to the left than the political parties. And the political parties are center parties. And that has changed everything, because this is a street movement.
Mm-hmm.
And
I agree.
And that street, it resembles the Bolivian thing. It's the people. It's we the people. It's we the people. And that we are going to see a lot more of. I have the impression.
Yeah.
I have the impression we're going to see a bit more of that in Brazil again, as a response to this idiot. And we're going to see a bit more of that in Ecuador and in Colombia. In Peru, I have no idea. Peru's falling apart. But,
with the pandemic. Okay, well, I do have one other question, maybe two other questions, and then I don't have any, but we'll see if other people do. I wanted to go back to Bruno, and Bruno, I wanted to take up the question that you had raised, that Attila had asked you, because you guys agree with each other, but I don't know what you were talking about. So what is this about the French Secret Service and the Macron government, etc.? Can you explain a little bit more? And then after that, maybe Oscar, you can say a few things about what's happening in Peru before we close.
Yeah, because concerning the French Secret Service, you know, because you have the two different elements. You have the internal elements and external elements. Internal elements, it means that, you know, since the Yellow Vest movement, a lot of higher administration functionaries, especially, of course, Secret Service, but not only, they are discovering that the system is not efficient for them. And they began to worry, because in a certain sense they are linked with what is happening in France. Macron bourgeoisie can go to Florida or Hawaii, but not not the French police. That's the first thing. And so they begin to be aware that you know, the people of France, including right-wing bourgeoisie, but let's say middle bourgeoisie, is disconnected with the system. I mean, you have now between 70% or 80% of the population in France that is telling that capitalism is a bad system. 70 to 80%, depending on which poll. Of course, it doesn't make them communist or socialist, but still, they are basically they are anti-capitalist. That's one element. The second element for Secret Service is that France is very active in Western Africa, and especially French troops are there. And they discover that there is something that is not working, because in a certain sense, the imperialist France is going in Africa to fight so-called terrorism, jihadism, Islamism, and so on. But on the other side, they are doing all their best not to help the Malian army to be efficient. So it looks like they are very happy that this terrorism exists. Because it's a pretext to be in Western Africa and to compete with American capital and German capital, who is also looking for Africa. And for the, let's say, nationalist Secret Service, they are doubting the fact that French elite with Macron are working for the interest of French capitalism, or what is left from French capitalism, let's say. And that's the point. That's that there is something like a local bourgeoisie which is fed up with this situation. And now with the lockdown, it's much worse for them, because a lot of, let's say, small business will know that they will not finish the lockdown, because they had the first lockdown and that they have the second lockdown. And you had a lot of you know, small business which are telling what they want us, why the government doesn't tell us that they want to ruin us, so Amazon, big Starbucks, McDonald's will take off all the hotels, all the restaurants, and that will be the end of French cuisine, for example, which is, you know, for the identity of French, it's important. And you know, when there is a Starbucks or McDonald's or all that taking over, or Hippopotamus, or all you know, this multinational restaurant taking French cuisine, it's a heresy. It's something unbearable for France. And you know, the Secret Service are linked with all this milieu to a certain extent. Of course, they're not our friends, but their interest is, but they have their own culture, I would say, and they see that their own culture also is destroyed. They were very happy when left in France, and especially the Communist Party, was destroyed. But now they discovered that after the destruction of communism, the destruction of socialism, now it's their turn. And that's the point, you know. So that's why quite a lot of really right-wing people, not extremists, but right-wing people, are now becoming anti-capitalist. telling that they are anti-capitalist. The problem is they don't really know what they want, but that's something else. But they think that capitalism, it's globalism, they are not able to compete in this capitalism, and so that's why that's why we have the 70-80% of people in France telling capitalism is a bad system. It doesn't make think revolutionary, but still people are talking about revolution. I don't think that there will be revolution, but people are talking about revolution as something possible, and as something that would not be so bad, actually.
Yeah, so I mean, this raises actually some interesting questions because, of course, the right wing can get anti-capitalist, and this can have some pretty bad consequences. So that's one thing, probably something we need to discuss in greater detail some other time. And of course, as you were talking about the French in West Africa, I am dying to hear more about your take on what's happening between France and Turkey right now, because it's happening.
See, what?
But
that's like the Corbyn thing.
Bracket that for a minute, because I know Attila wants to say something, and I want to get to Oscar. And today, definitely, I want to end on the hour at 10 o'clock because I have another thing after that. So, Attila, you wanted to say something to Bruno, and Bruno,
yes,
you can say something about France, Turkey. That would be good once you respond to Attila. Go ahead, Attila.
Yeah, I think it's very important what you are saying, because Bruno, that's the situation everywhere. So among sociologists studying inequality, there is a consensus that we are in a new era. The problem is not the very low, but the 4 against the 1. So the 1/5 against the 4/5. And this is going to be the major schism, because this 1/5 is actually living on estates and all kinds of things, and they are just concentrating money, power, and so on. And then the 4/5 is going against that. In that sense, so that's very important. The other thing I just wanted to tell to cheer you up with an old joke which I learned under socialism, which I am using in my thinking. The joke was the following: what is the difference between socialism and capitalism? Well, both are at the brink of an abyss, but socialism is one step ahead of capitalism. Now, socialism is over in a lot of sense. Now capitalism comes. That's what you're
Okay, Bruno, please respond. And as I say a couple of things about the France-Turkey thing.
Yeah, but France-Turkey is very important because it's a contradiction within, of course, NATO, and it's very important because, you know, Turkey is, France was a big power, but it's not a so big power as it was. Turkey was not a big power, but it's becoming a power. So now there is a contradiction between these two Mediterranean powers, because basically France, of course, is a North Atlantic country, but it's a country which is mostly linked with Mediterranean Sea and, of course, former colonies of Africa. And you can see it, for example, in Marseille. Marseille, the port of Marseille, is doing more or less 60% of its of ships of goods coming to Marseille or going out of Marseille are going to North Africa, to Maghreb, what we call in France or in Arabic. And so Mediterranean is basically important for France. And of course, when you have two competing powers inside Mediterranean Sea, Turkey in France, now it's becoming a point of contradiction between those two powers, those two, let's say, regional powers. And of course, that's why there is a strong contradiction with Turkey in Libya, but there is also strong contradiction in Syria and Lebanon, which is for France something. Lebanon is for France a flagship of its influence in the Mediterranean Sea. So, and the big Lebanese bourgeoisie is very well linked with French bourgeoisie. for a very a long time ago. And this makes situation complicated because now the Lebanese bourgeoisie, it's not only the, let's say, Christian, Catholic, Latin, pro-Western bourgeoisie, which was, and it's still to a certain extent, but it's also the Hariri family, which is a Muslim Sunni linked with Saudi Arabia. And it makes, of course, France linked with Saudi Arabia, which is competitor in the Muslim world with Turkey. And France is engaged on the side of Saudi Arabia, and it sells arms to Saudi Arabia in its war against Yemen. And it creates contradiction with Turkey. And this is, of course, important, especially if you add to that the question of French Islam, where Turkey is trying to take the leadership within Sunni Islam, but especially also within French Islam, due to the fact that we have in France, of course, a Turkish minority, but it's not the most important. The most important is that we have in France a quite strong Muslim Brotherhood structured Islam, which is of course linked with Turkey also now, and that makes the question of Islam, French Islam, important because it's also an aspect in the interior politics, not only in internal politics, not only in the external politics. The competition with Turkey is also inside France now. And France is also at the crossroads of contradiction in this situation. Turkey also is in the crossroad of contradiction because Erdogan is trying to be between West and East, but basically he didn't choose for the moment really clearly, even if the Azerbaijan war is pushing him on the anti-Russian and anti-Iranian side. We don't know how long it will last anyway.
Okay, thank you. I think there's loads more to talk about, but quickly to Oscar now.
About Peru. Peru was a very fast-growing country over the past 10 years. And suddenly, the pandemic began, and we had the sharpest GDP drop in the world. And that has confused everybody. It is an exception to the rule, because normally the countries that have fallen the most were the countries that would grow in the least. Yeah. Now, this is a fast-growing country that has fallen very much. The second thing is, it took all of the prevention measures, the correct prevention measures, with a lockdown in March. And it was a pretty rigid lockdown in Lima and in the capital city, in the cities. And suddenly, about 3 months ago, the pandemic began to grow, not in the cities, but in the jungle. The Amazon jungle, two things happened at once. First, there was a rise in people ill in the Amazon jungle, which is huge. It's an enormous space. The second thing is, there are no hospitals. So there was a double discovery. I mean, where are the hospitals? There are no hospitals. The only hospital is 2,000 kilometers away, and by the time they get there, they're dead. That discovery was very severe. The next discovery was the people from the jungle migrate to the mountains in one part of the year. So you had started to have in the eastern side of the Andes have three chains. The western side that looks at the Pacific Ocean, the eastern side that looks at the Amazon jungle, and the central Andes that look at the other mountains. Oh. So the problem here is the migration from the jungle goes up the eastern side. And there was another discovery. There's a whole lot of people on the Eastern Andes. There are no clinics. There is no basic health infrastructure. And we have the highest rate of death per million in the world. So both things happen at the same time, and we are in an election year. The elections are to be held in April. In the meantime, you have the political parties fractured. You have 4 presidents in jail. 4 in jail. And the population is fed up with the politicians. So this it's a very peculiar scenario, because we have these very bad numbers. There's an immense need to have